Well, good afternoon again. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So thank you, organizers, for having me here. I find it a very inspiring and very well organized event. Well, in my presentation, I would like to present the Lithuanian context of Aspazijas Vaidelote. And, the possibility to talk about this play in Lithuanian occurred in 2015 when I was doing my internship in St. Petersburg, trying to find early Lithuanian drama manuscripts. And among all these Lithuanian original plays, I was happy to find a translation of this tragedy made by Povilas Žaldokas, a Lithuanian theater lover of the beginning of the 20th century. I found it a very striking example of how a work could be adapted into another culture and how could it be transformed. So I think this is an interesting case study that will help me present some more general contexts. But first, why are these Lithuanian manuscripts in St. Petersburg? As you are all aware, of course, the beginning of the 20th century, Lithuania is a part of the Tsarist Russia, and every publicly staged play had to be censored according to the law of 1865. The censorship of dramatic works was handled by the main board for press affairs under the Ministry of the Interior, Главное управление по делам печати, and the directors or theater makers would send 2 copies of a play in written form or in a published one to this board, and here they were evaluated by a censor and got a stamp. So the blue one is a good one. It indicates that the drama or a piece for stage is suitable for performance. Представлению дозволено. And if the work was deemed unsuitable for performance, it was stamped with a red one. К представлению признано неудобным. And 1 copy of a censored play would be returned to the author with a resolution, while the other would remain in the board's library. So this is where all the works, what they're allowed or forbidden to be performed in public in the Russian Empire before 1917, were deposited. They are now stored in the censorship fund of the St. Petersburg State Theatre Library. So we can paradoxically be happy about the censorship. I guess this is the only positive aspect of the whole repressive system, because many of the early Lithuanian plays were not published. They were only in manuscript form, and they are preserved only in the censorship fund at the library. This fund contains 320 Lithuanian plays and other works intended for stage performance or recitation, and the most valuable part of the collection consists of more than 150 manuscripts, about 50 of which have never been published. And if we compare this Lithuanian plays with the Latvian ones, a striking fact occurs that when we have 320 Lithuanian plays in that censorship fund, the Latvian ones show that the Latvian theatre life in that time was both richer and more varied. While there are 320 Lithuanian censored dramas, there are 1,700 Latvian ones, 5 times more. And you'll see later that these figures are very much representative. Well, a couple of words about Aspazijas Vaidelote. It's one of the earliest dramas by Elsa Rosenberg, a tragedy written in the last decade of the 20th century. With this work, Aspazija receives recognition. She is hired by the Riga Latvian Theatre as a theatre playwright. In 1894, the tragedy Vaidelote premieres at the Riga Latvian Theatre, which is a great success. And as I have been able to find out, this tragedy is also the most frequently staged work by the playwright, by Aspazija, and was also adapted into an opera in 1927. And let me very briefly remind you the plot of the tragedy. This is a 5-act tragedy. It takes the audience back to the pagan times of 14th century Lithuania under the rule of King Algirdas. And against this backdrop of a clash between Christianity and paganism, the author focuses on a love triangle. King Algirdas wants to give his daughter Mirza, who was raised in the temple of a fire goddess Praurima, to Laimonas, a warrior who had distinguished himself in the fight against the Crusaders, as a wife. But Laimonas is in love with a temple's chief priestess, Asia, who has been forced to become a Westale. Then the secret relationship is revealed. The lovers are condemned to death. Mirza first wants to sacrifice the sinners to the goddess, that at the end of the tragedy, instead of sacrificing the sinners, she commits her own suicide. In this way, Mirza, on the one hand, appeases the old gods, and on the other hand, accepts the personal happiness of her beloved Laimonas and his chosen Asia. So the main conflict here is not between two powers of history, two group characters, pagans and Christian characters. The struggle is not between the forces of the history, but between two characters, Asia and Mirza. And of course, the novelty of his tragedy is apparent. It no longer looks for the object of representation in the external events, but in the inner life of a person. So Vaidelote is created as the inner drama of a protagonist, Mirza. This is a psychological story of her development for a naive girl in the temple of Praurima to a princess who wants to defend her rights and finally chooses her own death. And of course, this novelty of Aspazijas, the tragedy, was also felt by Lithuanian authors and writers. For example, Eduard Walter's review of Latvian literature presented Aspazija as one of the most important in the young current of the Latvian literature, bringing a whole new vitality. However, you could understand that to appreciate work is one thing, but to adapt it into one's own culture is another. And I would like to turn now to Lithuanian context and to the translation of Aspazija's tragedy. And to do so, first a couple of words about the theater of Lithuania at the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, it's in a completely different situation than the Latvian one. You probably know that the cultural development of Lithuania, or I should say the northwestern region of the Tsarist Imperial Russia, has been slowed down immensely by the fierce Russification policy. After the uprising of 1863 and 64, the Tsarist Russian authorities banned the Lithuanian press in Latin letters. Only Russian language was allowed at schools, and there were no public events in Lithuanian. So the first stage of Lithuanian theater is actually an amateur theater goers movement. The movement of so-called Lithuanian evenings. They started around 1885, and they lasted about 3 decades. And it manifested itself in the ethnographical territory of occupied Lithuania and in Lithuanian colonies in the major cities of the Russian Empire, as well in the United States, for example. Well, everywhere where we had a bigger or smaller Lithuanian community. In 1904, the ban of Lithuanian press is lifted, and before that date, all this movement evenings are secret. After this date, they become public, and they become a mass phenomenon. Usually, 1 or 2 short comedies of plays would be presented in such an evening, a choir singing and poetry recitation, dances afterwards. It is more or less an official gathering of Lithuanians among themselves, celebrating, well, being together, but it's also a political stance, for sure. What's very important to stress, there is a severe lack of works to be performed. So the earliest plays are usually translated from other languages. By 1910, about 130 plays had been performed in Lithuanian, of which approximately 2/3 were translated or adapted. The main language is Polish, Russian is the second one, and Latvian, well, it's on the 3rd place. The focus of my presentation today is the translation of Aspazija's tragedy by Povilas Žaldokas, alias Nepakentuolis. Nepakantuolis means more or less the one who hates, a hater. No, I have no idea why he called himself like this. We know very little about the translator himself, only that he lived in Riga. He was a chairman of Lithuanian society, and that he translated extensively from Latvian drama. For instance, he also translated plays by Davids Švenkis and Rudolfs Blaumanis. And here you can see a poster of Lithuanian Evening in Riga in 1908. The poster says that the Saturday 26th of April, the Lithuanian Society is holding theater evening with a comedy translated from Latvian. Intelligentsia. This is the name, Intelligenti, but as you can see, no name of the author of a play, no name of a translator of a play. It's like this at the beginning of, in the first stage of our theater. And this is the translation itself with a censor's permission of 1904. Aspazijas' name is clearly indicated, as you can see. So in 1908, the translation gets a permission to be performed openly, but however, I could find evidence that the translation was made probably already in 1903 on the initiative of Edward Walteris, who was living in St. Petersburg. So it was then being prepared for performance in that Russian city. And we have no record, unfortunately, that the tragedy was staged then, but it was certainly performed in Riga several times in 1908, in 1911, 1913. The tragedy was also staged in Vilnius, Šiauliai, and other larger Lithuanian cities. And by the way, we still don't have a translation of Aspazijas' tragedy entirely. I mean, we have the beginning of it translated in 2018 by our translator Antanas Valionis, and that's it. But let's go back to 1904 and to Žaldokas' translation. I think that this situation of a translation is a good reflection of the state of Lithuanian theater at that time. First of all, by translating a tragedy, Žaldokas transformed Aspazijas' poems into prose, without being able to retain the poetry. In this way, the neo-romantic poetic tragedy was transformed into a historical drama in prose. The translation is amateurish, very close to Latvian language. At the time, the common Lithuanian language was not yet established, as you may know. So Povilas Žaldokas' expression is sometimes even comical, full of archaism. Borrowings from Latvian language, the naming of characters varies. Algirdas is sometimes a king and sometimes a duke. It's evident that the play wasn't edited normally. And, to put it mildly, Povilas Žaldokas' translation is simplistic. It does not convey all the stylistic registers of Aspazijas' poetic style. Things that in the original work, where the backdrop for the inner drama of the main characters, have come to the center on the stage in the Lithuanian translation and productions. It seems to me that the translation was well aware of the needs of the audience of his time and met them. And in doing so, he simply simplified the artistic creation of Aspazijas' tragedy according to his own possibilities and the needs of his audience. And the expectations of the Lithuanian audience are revealed in a review that appeared in the Lithuanian newspaper Apvienība Lietuvininkų, Unity of Lithuanians. It was the reaction to Vaidelote's first production at Riga's Latvian theater in 1894 in Latvian. You can see that in the upper one, the review finishes, the quote finishes with a question, when will the Lithuanians do it themselves? There is still a lack of original works. In another review from the newspaper Vilniaus Žinios, Vilnius News, 1904, the reviewer first describes a few scenes from the Latvian theater in Riga, where he saw the Latvian play, and then concludes, as I watched and listened to the play, images of our antiquity began to rush through my mind. How beautiful it is, how much content there is in it for dramatic writings. Well, I can tell you that the reviewers' wishes were fulfilled at full, because one of the first directions of early original Lithuanian drama was the historical drama. And the other thing I would like to stress is that reviewers always emphasize the context of a Lithuanian heroic past opened up by Aspazijas tragedy. Lithuanian history is perceived in these reviews in an uncomplicated, idyllic way, as a reservoir of national character from which viewers could draw strength for the present. So, as I told you, dramatic works about Lithuanian history, well, they are particularly relevant for the beginning of the 20th century, for the first decade. And, well, several plots dominate Lithuanian historical drama, one of them being a woman sacrificing herself for saving the duke, saving the leader of a nation. The story goes that a young, beautiful maiden helps Duke Vytautas, who is imprisoned by his enemies, to escape. Vytautas, well, the duke, he disguises himself in her clothes and escapes from the castle while she stays in the duke's place. In this way, she chooses her own death because she wants to free the leader of a nation. Well, this plot probably comes from Adam Mickiewicz's creation, from Grażyna, probably. Polish Romanticism did indeed have a profound influence on Lithuanian historical drama. So Aspazijas tragedy was interpreted according to this plot, and on the other hand, influenced Lithuanian playwrights themselves. Well, one of the direct influences to our Lithuanian author, Birutė Avižinienė. She sees the staging of Vaidelote in Mintauja, Jelgava, and she decides to have a pseudonym, Vaidelote. She is Vaidelote. Or her husband, also well familiar with Latvian context, he writes in 1914 a historical drama called Mirga. So the protagonist of Mirga has the name of Mirza, of course, of Aspazijas. But here I have, I guess, here I have a poster for that staging of his Mirga. I tried to make the libretto, the plot, bigger for you. It's in Russian, but in fact it's the same plot about young, beautiful maiden who saves the duke. So it is the influence of Aspazijas on the one hand, but on the other one, it's a completely different story. I think, well, and I could mention different dramas from Lithuania from that time, and it's always the same approach to the female character. The protagonists of these plays do not hesitate to heroically give their lives for their homeland. And the typical statement of such a character is put into the mouth of Vestale Danutė. This is another play by Sofija Kymantaitė Čiurlionienė. She says, "Duke, how sweet is to die for you, the leader of Lithuania. How sweet is to die for you," right? This is not the inner struggle of Mirza, of Aspazijas. It's really very uncomplicated and heroic well, deed. These characters do not go through an inner struggle at all like Aspazijas Mirza, and their motives are different. The artistic interpretation of these characters reveals a completely different, earlier stage in the development of Lithuanian drama, where Aspazija raised the freedom of the individual and discussed issues of personal dignity. The Lithuanian audience was interested in historical themes, which were preserved in a completely romantic tradition, uncritically idealizing. This is, so to speak, simplistic reading of a tragedy. And this reading is also confirmed by the translation, which is simplistic as well. which was not published, for example, which didn't reach all the stage of a literary work. So I think we could make at least several conclusions. On the one hand, Aspazijas tragedy was perceived according to the needs and possibilities of the Lithuanian theatre at that time. And on the other, I strongly believe that it influenced the Lithuanian playwrights. And we could also look for the possible parallels between Lithuanian, feminine authors and the stances and behavior and and posture of Aspazija. But, this is the topic of another paper. Thank you.